Hey guys, tonight we wander back to the year 1233, time when the air in Rome was thick with incense, sweat, and the unmistakable aroma of boiling cabbage. The streets are crowded with mule carts and people wearing more wool than seems medically advisable, and above it all, church bells clang like they're being played by a particularly angry toddler. You're not entirely sure why you're here, but you do know one thing. It smells like something went wrong a few centuries ago. You stretch, yawn, and look around. The walls are the color of old parchment, and the buildings seem to lean a little too close together, like they're swapping gossip. The sky is a soft, dusty, gray classic, medieval mood lighting. You hear the mutter of monks in Latin, the clink of coins at the market, and someone yelling about a fish that is definitely not fresh. You also hear something else. Silence. The kind of silence that should be filled with scratching, meowing, and a general sense of feline judgment. But there's none of that. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment, letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start walking through the city, stepping around puddles that you hope are just rainwater. It doesn't take long before you realize that something feels off. Not just the smell, which has been off since you arrived, but the absence of a certain whiskered presence. No cats, no fur slinking past barrels, no tails disappearing into alleys, no lazy eyes judging humanity from sunlit windowsills, and once you notice it, it becomes impossible to ignore. You lean against a stone wall beside a fruit vendor, who is very clearly selling last week's pears and ask casually, "Where are all the cats?" He shrugs. "Gone," he says. Some say the church doesn't want them here anymore. Some say they're cursed. Then he holds out a shriveled apple and tries to charge you double. You decline. As you move on, you hear more whispers. A fishmonger mutters about his cellar being overrun with rats. A baker says he hasn't seen a cat in days. Even the mice seem to walk with more confidence. It's like the entire rodent population just got promoted. You pass a church where a sermon echoes through the doors. The priest warning about creatures of the night. He doesn't mention cats specifically, but his tone is more than a little suspicious. You wonder, when exactly did cats become a problem? Historians still debate whether the people of Rome noticed the feline absence before or after the Pope did. But one thing's clear, cats, especially the black ones, are in trouble. And it all starts here. It's not that you were expecting medieval Rome to be a feline paradise, but something's clearly shifted. The balance is off, and the pigeons, they're having a field day. You round a corner into a quieter part of the city. A nun sweeps the steps of a small chapel, humming a tune you can't quite place. You ask her about the cats. She pauses. The Holy Father says they are not to be trusted, she says softly. They see what men cannot. Cryptic, vague, definitely unsettling. And there it is, again, that name. The Holy Father. Pope Gregory IX. You don't know it yet, but that name is going to come up a lot in the next few hours. He's not just the spiritual leader of the 13th century church. He's about to be the unexpected villain in a very fluffy story. The day stretches on, clouds gather. A merchant is selling relics that look suspiciously like leftover dinner bones, and slowly the pieces begin to fit. Something official is happening, something PayPal, and it might just involve banning cats. You don't know how deep this goes yet, but trust me, it's going to get weird. You continue walking, your sandals slapping gently against uneven cobblestones as the scent of roasted onions and faint despair drifts from a nearby tavern. A boy runs past you, arms full of firewood and face smudged with soot. He's laughing, but not the kind of laughter that means everything is okay. More like the kind that says, I just saw something ridiculous, and maybe a little cursed. You follow him. He disappears into a crowd gathering near the fountain in the town square. A man with a pointed hat and a scroll in hand is reading aloud to a small, suspiciously tense audience. His Latin is florid, theatrical. You catch a few words that don't sit right. Heresy, dark rituals, animal familiars, and the ominous phrase, in the form of a black cat. Wait, what? You squint. The man is quoting from something. A PayPal document, a letter. Whatever it is, it's making the townsfolk clutch their prayer beads and side-eye the alleyways, like there's a demon waiting behind every bread cart. Then it clicks. You push closer and catch the phrase, Vox in Rama, a voice in Rama. The man claims it's a recent warning from none other than Pope Gregory IX in it. He describes an alleged satanic ritual in which heretics kiss the butt of a black cat during a dark ceremony. Yes, that kind of kiss. No, you're not mishearing. You pause to take that in. Let's be clear, historians still debate whether Gregory IX genuinely believed this, or was simply manipulated by a particularly theatrical inquisitor named Conrad of Marburg. Conrad was famous for seeing heresy in the way people sneezed or arranged their firewood, and he had a real flair for drama. So naturally, when he sent his wild claims to the Pope, they came with spice. Apparently, Conrad had encountered a cult in Germany that engaged in deeply questionable behavior, including allegedly worshipping a giant toad, receiving unholy sacraments from a pale man with glowing eyes, and, of course, honoring a black cat with questionable ceremonies. Gregory, moved by this terrifying encounter, possibly just tired of getting Conrad's weekly updates, responded with Vox in Rama, a document now echoing through your ears like a bad idea turned into official doctrine. It spread quickly. You look around and notice that people aren't just concerned, they're frightened. One woman clutches her apron and mutters a prayer. A man crosses himself 3 times and spits into the dirt. A child kicks a shadow. You glance at a nearby rooftop and wonder if, just maybe, there's still one cat left up there rolling its eyes. And the irony, nobody's seen these so-called heretical ceremonies. No cat has been interviewed. No toads have issued a statement. But the story has legs, 4 of them, to be exact, with little twitchy ears. You sit at a shaded bench beneath a fig tree and overhear a pair of older men discussing whether their neighbor's cat is too black to be innocent. You resist the urge to say something, time traveler etiquette, and albeit it's clear that fear is winning over reason. Historians today still argue over whether Gregory IX meant this as a limited warning or a broad condemnation. Some say it was a localized response that spiraled out of control. Others point out that the document's publication lined up just a bit too well with growing tensions between church and heretical sects in Europe. Either way, you're witnessing a classic case of medieval memification. A rumor spreads, it gets official backing, and suddenly, cats are public enemy number one. By now, you're heading back toward your inn. You pass a man attempting to bless his house with garlic cloves and holy water, because, apparently, cats are now supernatural threats to structural integrity. You sigh and shake your head. You've only been in this century for a day and already you're exhausted by the logic. But you can't help wondering what happens when the cats are really gone. Who will chase the rats? Who will sprawl in sunbeams and ignore humanity with such regal disdain? Night begins to fall. The shadows grow longer, and still not a single cat in sight. Something is. You wake up the next morning to the sound of someone trying to sing Gregorian chants while clearly nursing a hangover. Outside your window, the sun has turned the dusty streets of Rome a dull beige, and the air is already warming to that familiar scent of whetstone and regret. As you make your way back through the city, something keeps catching your eye, or rather, not catching your eye. Every alley, every rooftop, every bakery doorstep still looks ... weirdly empty. You begin to realize that the absence of cats isn't just an oddity anymore. It's becoming a problem. You pause beside a bakery, where yesterday a plump orange tabby lounged in the sun. Today, just breadcrumbs and a mouse the size of a baked potato darting behind a flour sack. You keep walking, heading toward a public square where a small crowd is gathered. In the center stands a man in faded ecclesiastical robes and a slightly crooked hat. He's gesturing with great enthusiasm to a crudely drawn diagram that includes flames, some unhappy stick figures, and what looks like a very disgruntled cat. "This," he says loudly, "is how heresy spreads." You can't help but notice that the drawing style strongly resembles the kind of thing you might see on a medieval pub menu, half artistic interpretation, half wishful thinking. Still, the crowd eats it up. It becomes clear this isn't just a rumor anymore. It's evolving into something formal, something ... institutional. You spot a friar handing out leaflets, each featuring a stern warning about beasts of darkness and creatures that walk silently in the night. You try to ask him if he means bats, but he shakes his head. "Cats," he says, dramatically, "especially the black ones." You're not sure if you should laugh or cry, so you settle for blinking very slowly in disbelief. Historians still debate whether this hysteria was religious fervor or just a really effective public relations campaign by the anti-feline faction of the church. Either way, it's working in the marketplace. Vendors are selling tiny wooden charms shaped like dogs' be, 'cause, apparently, they're considered loyal and untainted. A small crowd gathers to cheer on a terrier that just barked at a shadow. It's surreal. You duck into a tavern for some bread and wine and overhear a conversation between two soldiers. One of them swears that a cat hissed at him last week, and now his cousin has a limp. The other says his neighbor's goat stared at a black cat once and gave sour milk for 3 days. You sip your wine slowly, very slowly. Outside, the atmosphere grows tenser. It's not just fear anymore, it's action. People have started organizing sweeps of neighborhoods. Not to clean anything, mind you. No, these are specifically to chase down any remaining cats. You even hear the word purge, whispered, like it's the secret ingredient in a stew. You trail behind one of these impromptu squads. They're armed with sticks, brooms, and, for some reason, a ladle. You spot one young man looking deeply uncomfortable, clutching a small black kitten under his cloak. He sees you, sees your silent nod of approval, and ducks into a side street. You hope he keeps running. And this is where things get tragic because you begin to notice a real consequence. Rats. So many rats in the cellars, in the streets, under carts. They move in packs now, like they've been waiting for their moment. And honestly, you think they have. The cats are gone. And with them, the fragile, whisker-thin line of defense against a very real, very bitey problem. A merchant tells you he's lost 3 sacks of grain in a week. A baker shows you rat-chewed shelves. Even the church starts to complain wholly. Relics, it turns out, aren't rat-proof. You sit on the edge of a fountain and watch a rat steal a piece of cheese from a monk's plate. The monk sighs, raises his hands, and mutters something about divine punishment. You suspect it's just a hungry rodent with good timing. Historians still wonder how people didn't make the connection sooner, how they didn't realize that less cats meant more rats, and more rats meant ... Well, something worse coming. But humans are notoriously bad at linking cause and effect when there's a black cat to blame. And so you keep walking, past the statues, the vendors, the slowly souring meat stands. Rome hasn't fallen, but it's teetering, and nobody seems to realize it yet. You start your morning with the now familiar ritual of dodging questionable puddles and avoiding eye contact with people holding brooms like medieval ghostbusters. The sun is barely up, but already the city feels edgier than usual. Rome is not a city at peace, it's a city on the lookout for pause. You turn a corner and almost trip over a wooden crate labeled heretical contraband. Inside, feathers, some melted candles, and what looks like a poorly taxidermied frog wearing a tiny paper crown. You're not sure if it's evidence of witchcraft or just a very committed prank further along. You find yourself walking behind a traveling monk, robes dusty, his sandals falling apart, and his mouth moving non-stop. He's muttering what sounds like a sermon to himself, or maybe to the chickens pecking at his heels. Eventually, curiosity wins. You catch up and ask what he's talking about. He pauses dramatically. The devil's furred companion, he whispers, eyes wide, black as sin, cunning as Eve. You blink slowly. This is going to be a long morning. You ask where he heard such things, and that opens the floodgates. Brother Conrad, he says reverently, he's seen things, wrote to His Holiness, warned us all. Ah, yes, that name again. Conrad of Marburg. Now, if you haven't had the pleasure, Conrad is the inquisitor who could find blasphemy in a bowl of lentils. His reputation is built on excessive zeal, creative accusations, and a fondness for declaring people heretics based on very little evidence, such as owning too many spoons or smiling on a Thursday. Historians still argue whether Conrad genuinely believed in the wild stories he spread, or if he was just on a power trip with a flair for the dramatic. Either way, he had the Pope's attention, and more importantly, the Pope's pen. It was Conrad who described a secret heretical cult involving a black cat, rituals in candlelit rooms, and lots of chanting. There was even a part about the cat sitting upright and delivering prophecies. You wonder, were these people high on something? Medieval air quality wasn't great, but people listened, and Pope Gregory IX, who was dealing with actual real-world problems, like political rivals and territorial disputes, latched onto Conrad's report like a drowning man grabbing a floating barrel of incense. From that moment, fear turned institutional. The Pope's Vox in Rama document didn't just mention heresy, it outlined it with unsettling specifics, including the involvement of the devil and his preferred feline accomplice. Cue the paranoia. As you follow the muttering monk, you notice something else. The story's changing slightly in every retelling. In one version, the cat levitates. In another, it talks. In yet another, it bursts into flames when touched with holy water. None of it's consistent, but all of it's terrifying. The human brain, it seems, doesn't need logic. It just needs repetition. You pass a group of villagers painting a sign with crude drawings of a cat and a pitchfork. A boy holds up a torch for dramatic effect. You consider suggesting shadow puppets instead, safer, less flammable, back at the city center. Another friar is giving a public address. He thunders about the dangers of secret cults and how cats, especially black ones, are clearly satanic spies. Then he trips over a root and blames the devil. Of course, you stop at a nearby bakery to get some stale bread and strike up a conversation with the baker's wife. She says her grandmother had a black cat that could predict storms. You ask how. She shrugs. It hid under the bed before it rained. You sip your cider slowly. These are the tales that built an empire of fear, and yet you can't help but notice that the more people talk about the evil of cats, the fewer of them there are to challenge the narrative. The cats, in their infinite wisdom, seem to be vanishing before things get worse. You imagine them somewhere in a sunlit field, purring smugly while humanity sorts out its superstitions. You walk past a stone wall scrawled with fresh warnings. Beware the cat's eye. Whiskers are watching, and a less coherent one that simply says, fur is sin. You wonder if they just ran out of vowels. Night falls again. Torches flicker along the streets. Somewhere, a lute is being played very badly, and the rats, they're still celebrating. Section 5. You start the day trying to forget the rat you saw last night, carrying an entire fig like it had a grocery list. But Rome doesn't let you forget. Things it leans in, full of drama, and dares you to look away. This morning, you find yourself in a quieter part of the city, where the streets are narrower. The laundry lines sag lower, and the buildings seem to lean inward, like they're whispering secrets. You trail behind a boy chasing a goat and end up outside a modest home that smells like rosemary and slightly burnt soup. A man in a hooded cloak stands at the doorstep. He's not threatening just ... overly enthusiastic. He's holding a rolled-up parchment and a crude wooden emblem that looks vaguely official. You stay back, listening as he begins talking to the woman who answered the door. She's a boticaria, runs a small apothecary. You know because the air smells of dried herbs and something pungent that might be fermented leeches. She listens patiently while the man rants about moral decay, heresy, and of course cats. You peek inside. A shelf stacked with tiny bottles, jars of mystery powders, and nestled beside a bowl of lavender, a small, sleek black cat. curled up and deeply uninterested in the conversation. The man points, gasps, declares it a sign of witchcraft. He shouts something about the familiar of darkness. The woman sighs and says, "That's Pietro. He eats the spiders." But it's too late. Within minutes, a small crowd gathers. Someone throws a cabbage. The cat, wisely, disappears behind a cabinet. Someone else starts praying loudly. And then, because every story needs a dramatic turn, one man starts reciting parts of Vox in Rama from memory, poorly. The woman tries to explain, Pietro isn't evil, he's helpful. He's also very fond of sleeping on warm bread, which is a nuisance, not a demonic trait. But reason isn't welcome today. Fear always shouts louder. You stand in the back, helpless, watching as suspicion turns into accusation, and accusation turns into frenzy. The apothecary tries to protect the cat, but the mob is louder, faster. Eventually, they storm the shop. Pietro escapes thankfully. You see him dart across the rooftops, fur bristled, tail flicking like a banner of protest. The shop, however, doesn't fare as well. Jars are shattered, dried herbs are trampled. Someone knocks over a cauldron that definitely wasn't magical, but now smells cursed. The woman is left standing amidst the wreckage, holding a single unbroken bottle like it's a shield. You walk away, heart heavy. Historians still debate how often this sort of scene played out. There's not a record for every mob, every accusation, but they agree on this. Fear, weaponized, becomes policy. And in this case, it cost lives, human and feline alike. Later, you sit by the river, listening to the water slap against mossy stones. A fisherman mutters about his boat being overrun with rats. No cats left to keep them in check. He shrugs, says maybe it's God's punishment. Then he offers you a raw eel. You politely decline. Back in the market, the air is buzzing with tension. A merchant whispers that he saw a rat stealing holy bread. A nun claims she heard a cat meowing during Mass, and now believes the devil has infiltrated the choir. You suspect it was just bad singing. Someone paints a crude sign on the wall. Pause, bring plague. The irony, of course, is that the plague hasn't even arrived yet, but it's already being blamed on the ones who could have helped prevent it. And you, time traveler of questionable luck, can only watch. You want to shout, to explain basic rodent control and disease vectors. But that's not how history works. It doesn't take suggestions. The sun begins to set, casting long golden shadows that should feel peaceful but don't. The city feels uneasy, like it's holding its breath somewhere in the distance. A single cat yowls, and the city, tragically, doesn't hear by now. The absence of cats has become more than eerie, it's catastrophic. You don't need a degree in medieval urban ecology, which, to be fair, no one has to realize that things are falling apart one squeak at a time. This morning, the city is louder than usual, not because of people, but because of rats. They're everywhere, under carts, on rooftops. One even runs across your foot as if to say, "Good morning, we own this place now." You step into the central granary, which once smelled of wheat and civic pride. Now it smells of mildew and rodent rebellion. The overseer, a man with shoulders like barrels and a voice like gravel waves, a torch around, muttering about foul omens and corn cursed by shadow. What he means is, the rats have eaten a third of the stockpile. You glance at a gnawed sack. It's basically a sieve now. Outside, a small crowd has gathered, not for entertainment, lest you count panicked arguing as entertainment, but because the city's leaders have called an emergency meeting. You sneak into the back row, trying to blend in with a group of nuns, one of whom is definitely hiding cheese. The bishop clears his throat. He's wearing robes that could double as picnic blankets and holding a scroll with enough wax seals to qualify as armor. He announces that in light of the rodent affliction, certain theological considerations will be revisited. There's talk of divine punishment, impure living, and the possibility that someone somewhere might have offended a saint. No one mentions the cats. A few brave citizens do raise the issue. Perhaps, one suggests cautiously, it wasn't wise to chase away the natural enemies of rats. A woman in a flax headscarf nods vigorously. She says her uncle used to keep 3 cats and never had a rat problem until the church labeled his tabby suspiciously silent. But the bishop just frowns. The matter, he says, is spiritual. Of course it is. You wander away before they start blaming left-handedness or comets. Your walk takes you past the tanner's quarter, where the smell could legally qualify as a punishment. There, you meet a boy probably no older than 12 sitting beside a barrel, cradling a tiny black kitten wrapped in linen. You crouch down, ask his name. He looks around nervously and whispers, "His name's Lucio. He was my sister's." You ask where his sister is, but he just shakes his head. The kitten sneezes. You resist the urge to snatch both of them and run to the 21st century, where at least people write think pieces about cat superstitions instead of forming pitchfork committees. Historians still discuss how the demonization of cats contributed, indirectly, to worsening conditions in European cities, especially leading up to the Black Death. With fewer cats around, rats thrived. And with rats came fleas. And with fleas came, well, we'll get there for now. The city just feels sick. The drains overflow. The markets are infested. One merchant is caught selling holy rice that turns out to be just rice. With rat droppings, you stop at a tavern to eat something questionably edible. A man beside you tells a story half-drunk, fully convinced that a witch once cursed his grandfather's cat, and ever since, every child in his family sneezes at moonlight. You nod politely and eat around the parts of your stew that might have tails. Later, you return to the apothecary's shop. It's quieter now. Most of the broken glass has been swept, and the shelves, though sparse, hold the essentials: sage, cloves, and a new, aggressively defensive broom. The apothecary greets you. They think fear is protection, she says, but fear has never caught a rat. You nod. That night, as you walk back through the city, you hear it. Not silence, not yet, but the subtle scurry of dominance shifting underfoot. The rats have claimed the alleys. The people still pretend this is temporary, and somewhere, maybe just outside the city walls, the cats are watching, waiting, grooming themselves with the self-assuredness of creatures who know they were right all along. You wake up to the distinct sound of someone shouting about cheese. At first, you assume it's another rat-related disaster, and you're not wrong. Outside, the local cheesemonger is chasing a rat the size of a small dog with a ladle. It's carrying a full wedge of Parmesan, like it just won the medieval lottery. You sigh and get dressed. Your sandals stick slightly to the ground as you make your way through the city streets. which now bear more resemblance to a rat convention than a functioning civilization. And yet the people still refuse to admit the obvious. They miss the cats, but they miss them quietly. The real kicker: some have started blaming witches again. Because when logic fails, scapegoats multiply. And if cats are the devil's creatures, then clearly anyone who ever owned one must have been in league with Beelzebub. You pass a notice board, now plastered with crude drawings, cats with glowing red eyes, broomsticks, ominous moons, and one doodle that you think might actually be a turtle. Artistic accuracy is not a priority. This growing paranoia travels faster than the plague, which is ironic given what's coming. You tag along with a traveling merchant caravan heading north. They sell salt, cloth, and news, the kind of gossip that binds medieval society together. And of course, the headline of the week is Gatos Praetus Prohibidos M. Yes, the cat ban is going viral. Florence, Milan, bits of France, it's all catching on. You stop in a small village en route where even the goats look suspicious. At the inn, you overhear a group of farmers discussing their neighbor's cat, who, they claim, stares too long at the moon. One man swears it hissed when sprinkled with holy water. Another says it walks only on even days. None of this makes sense, but no one seems to mind. At dinner, you're served a stew that smells vaguely of burnt onion and vague accusations. The innkeeper warns you not to speak the word cat too loudly after sunset. They'll think you're inviting something in, she whispers. You ask what they are. She leans in and very seriously says, "Whiskered spirits." You chew your stew quietly after that. Later that evening, while the town gathers for a candlelight prayer to ward off the evil eye, you slip into a quieter corner near the stables. There, in the straw, you find a family of cats, silent, sleek, and undeniably aware of their outlaw status. One of them, a black tomcat, blinks at you with what you swear is judgment. Or maybe just boredom. Hard to tell with cats. You sit with them for a while. It's the first peace you've felt in days. Historians still explore how superstition migrated, how one PayPal document sparked a continental panic, how whispered fears shaped laws, and how cats, creatures of myth and mousing, became targets for human fear dressed in theology. You think of that black tomcat as you leave the village the next morning. He's sitting on a fence post, tail wrapped neatly around his paws, looking for all the world like he owns the place. And maybe he does, because deep down, you realize something important. The cats haven't really gone anywhere. They're just waiting for people to come to their senses, or at least for the rats to get fat enough to be worth the trouble. You head out with the caravan again, the sun rising like a slow apology over the hills. Another town, another round of rumors, another missing cat, and all the while the real problem, the creeping one with whiskers, fleas, and sharp teeth, continues to grow. But hey, at least the drawings of evil cats are getting better. One of them even has shading. By now, you've learned a valuable lesson. Fear travels faster than ox carts, spreads wider than gossip at a public well, and needs no evidence to thrive, just enough people willing to say, "I heard it from someone." Who knows? As you journey north with the merchant caravan, the landscapes shift: rolling hills, sleepy vineyards, villages with names that sound like sneezes, but one thing stays the same: no cats. And where there are no cats, There are plenty of stories about why, in one town, you hear that black cats are the guardians of forbidden libraries buried beneath churches. In another, that they steal the breath of sleeping children. In yet another, that they sing ancient lullabies to the moon and cause cows to dry up in protest. You try not to laugh. The man telling you this is carrying a pitchfork and has a suspicious lack of eyebrows. You reach a walled city that prides itself on its cleanliness, but the smell of rat urine says otherwise. There's a public notice pinned to a plank in the center square. It reads, "Let no feline be fed, sheltered, nor regarded without suspicion." Below it, someone has scrawled in charcoal, "Except Tabitha. She's cool." Tabitha, apparently, is the mayor's cat, white as snow, sacred as relics, untouched by suspicion. This is your first taste of feline favoritism. It turns out that while black cats are clearly in league with the devil, white cats are just blessed with heavenly clarity, right? Because color theory is theology now. Historians still debate whether this bias was purely aesthetic or rooted in deeper symbolic associations with purity and light. You just think it's convenient that the nobility's favorite cats always seem to be exempt from persecution. You pass through another village where the local priest insists cats walk in circles to draw infernal power into the earth. When asked why they also nap for 16 hours a day, he glares and mutters something about diabolical meditation. Still, the paranoia is not just urban anymore, it's gone rural. You find yourself in a farmstead where the only cats allowed are kept in locked barns and fed through slats like furry prisoners. A farmer confesses that he still keeps 2 black cats for the mice, but hides them in the hayloft. You're invited up a creaky ladder to meet them. Their names are Bruno and Lorenzo. They look bored, clean, and utterly uninterested. In your presence, you stroke Lorenzo's head and wonder, not for the first time, how this species became a religious scapegoat while simultaneously refusing to care about anything ever outside. A storm is gathering. You smell the rain before you see its sharp mineral with a hint of petrichor and wet thatch. People rush to close shutters. Chickens panic in that theatrical way chickens always do. And the cats, they stretch, yawn, and find better places to nap that night. You take shelter in a chapel where a traveling friar is delivering a lecture to a crowd of farmers and their muddy children. He waves a scroll dramatically. The cat is a vessel, he declares, for sin that walks. He tells the tale of a heretic who kept 7 cats, 1 for each deadly sin. You resist the urge to ask which one gluttony was, probably the orange one, as he launches into a fiery warning about midnight purring and inverted tail positions. You're not making this up. The power goes out. By power, of course, you mean the candle he was using. The room plunges into darkness. In the silence that follows, you hear a distinct sound, mraw, a low, curious meow from somewhere near the pulpit. No one moves. Another meow. Closer now. The friar starts to sweat, and then pandemonium. People shout. Someone faints. A baby starts crying, and in the midst of it, a small black kitten with a white spot on its paw strolls confidently down the aisle like it's inspecting real estate. You never find out what happened to that kitten. It disappeared as quickly as it came. But for one glorious moment, you swear it winked at you. Afterward, the friar claims the devil himself sent the cat. Others say it was a test. One woman swears it was Saint Anthony reincarnated. You just smile and keep walking, because at this point, you know the line between fear and farce is very, very thin. You leave the candle-blown chaos of the chapel behind and head into the countryside, where paranoia grows like weeds. Fields are wide, skies are enormous, and rumors spread on the wind faster than mildew on a monastery wall. Your next stop is a sleepy Bavarian village where the houses lean like they're tired of standing. The people are polite, if wary, and the goats are louder than necessary. You're barely there an hour before you hear her name, Helga. Everyone talks about her. No one agrees on what she actually does. She talks to animals, whispers, a baker. She hasn't aged in 20 years, mutters a seamstress. I saw her feeding soup to a hedgehog, adds a miller. Gravely, you decide to meet this mythical woman before the local theology committee turns her into an effigy. Helga lives at the edge of the village, in a crooked wooden house surrounded by vegetables and vines that look like they're plotting something. The air smells like dill, garlic, and warm straw. You knock on her fence, and a dozen chickens come running like she's the queen of snacks. You found her. She opens the door, wipes her hands on an apron stained with beet juice, and gives you the kind of look that says, I know you're here for the story, not the vegetables. Inside, her home is cozy, packed with dried herbs hanging from beams, jars of pickled things, and shelves full of hand-copied books. In one corner, a calico cat lounges on a pillow, purring with the confidence of someone who's survived several inquisitions. You ask if she's heard the rumors. She snorts. Of course, she says. They think I dance with devils. I have a limp, not a ritual. She explains that her reputation started years ago when someone saw her coaxing a cow out of a ditch using only her voice and a carrot. Since then, any unusual animal behavior within 50 miles is blamed on her. You point to the calico and the cat. That's Kay's, she replies. She hates everyone, especially priests. You like Kay's immediately. Helga tells you about how she used to keep more cats. They kept the mice away, curled up by the fire, and occasionally stole sausages. Normal cat behavior. But when the whispers about witches and cats grew louder, people stopped trading with her. A few even tried to poison her chickens. She lost 3 cats that year. Not to disease, not to old age, to fear. Historians still argue whether rural women like Helga were ever truly witches or if they were just too competent with herbs, too kind to animals, and too independent for their own safety. The line between healer and heretic was often drawn by whoever had the loudest voice in church. Outside, the wind picks up, a storm's rolling in again. You sit by the fire while Kays stares at you like you owe her rent. Helga hums as she stirs a pot of something fragrant. You ask what it is. Soup for the chickens, she says. Of course it is. You leave the next morning before sunrise. The sky is pale and purple, and the chickens are already awake and indignant. Helga hands you a small satchel of herbs for good sleep, then warns you not to eat them if the moon is full. You're not sure if she's joking. You thank her anyway. Back in the village, someone is already whispering that you spent the night in a dark place. You smile and nod. Let them wonder. The road ahead is long and winding. Along the way, you see fewer cats, more rats, and a new kind of fearless theatrical, more resigned. People no longer pretend they're in control. They're just trying to make it through another week without losing crops or children or their minds. You pass a man selling talismans made of twigs and feathers, guaranteed to repel evil spirits, he says. One of them looks suspiciously like a feather duster. You buy one anyway, because deep down, you know it's not the cats people fear. It's what they represent: mystery, independence, the refusal to obey. And history, it seems, has always had a problem with things that don't purr on command. You follow the worn trade road south toward the lowlands, the path grooved by centuries of hooves, wheels, and poorly thought-out pilgrimages. You're moving slower now, not just because your sandals are starting to resemble shredded cabbage leaves, but because the air itself feels heavier, as if the land is bracing for something no one quite understands. In the distance, you see a spire. Then two. Then the huddled outline of a town that looks like it was assembled out of bread crusts and smoke. You arrive just before dusk. The gates are open, but only barely, and the guards eye you with suspicion. One of them is chewing something. That might be tobacco, might be bark. Either way, it's loud. You ask what's new in town, and the answer is chilling in its simplicity. The rats are winning. You don't even blink anymore. Inside, the town is a blend of desperation and denial. Merchants still cry out half-heartedly about their cabbages, which are visibly hollowed by bite marks. A cobbler is patching boots with what you hope isn't parchment from old religious texts. And in the center square, a small child is loudly accusing a local cat statue of bringing bad luck. It's made of bronze, and even that cat has graffiti on it. You follow the scent of smoke to a small chapel where a sermon is already underway. The priest stands before a half-burnt altar, his voice bouncing off the cold stone walls. His tone is somewhere between fire and brimstone and sleep-deprived librarian. And the pestilence creeps, brothers and sisters, because the unclean beasts, once welcomed into our homes, have brought the gaze of darkness upon us. He gestures dramatically to a crude tapestry depicting a rat the size of a horse riding a wave of fire. The artwork is ... ambitious. After the service, you linger by the door, listening to whispered conversations. Lucia's baby fell ill. She had a cat once. Have you seen the shadows in the well? My uncle says they're shaped like tails. They say if you dream of a cat, someone you love will betray you. Superstition has evolved. It's no longer about cats being heretical or demonic. It's become viral, mutating into folklore that people don't even question. You'd be impressed if it weren't so maddening. At the edge of town, you meet a grain merchant who invites you to share his fire. He looks tired, with the kind of eyes that have seen too many seasons and too few harvests. Over dry bread and thin ale, he tells you the town used to have a dozen cats, one in every barn, every cellar. Now nothing. The rats came like a biblical plague. He lost 2 storage houses already. The grain is riddled with teeth marks. The rats chew through the walls, sleep in the sacks, dance on the rafters like they own the place. He swears one of them winked at him once. You believe him. That night, you walk the perimeter of the town. Torches flicker from windows. Somewhere, a woman is crying. Somewhere else, a lute is being played badly. And along the stone walls, you see the true damage. Claw marks, tiny holes, frayed edges of burlap sacks gnawed to uselessness. You crouch near one of the outer storehouses and listen. Scratch, scratch, skitter, silence, then a faint squeak, then dozens more, and all you can think about are the cats, the soft padding of their feet, the way they used to prowl these same spaces, tail flicking, ears tuned to movement. The hunters are gone, and the prey is multiplying. Historians still reflect on this tragic irony by casting out the natural pest control agents due to superstition. Towns across Europe invited in the very thing they feared most. They built walls against evil, but left the door open for disease. You return to the chapel, curious, and find a young deacon still inside, cleaning the altar. You strike up a conversation. He's thoughtful, educated, unrarely for this time skeptical of the anti-cat hysteria. They say the black ones are evil, he says, but I've read older texts, Egyptian scrolls, Roman writings. Cats were sacred once, useful, honored. Ask what changed. He sighs. Power changed. Fear replaced reason. And fear is much easier to preach. He invites you to stay the night in the chapel's side chamber. You lie awake for a while, staring at a wooden ceiling carved with vines and angels that look suspiciously feline. Somewhere deep in the walls, you hear a rat, then another, then a third. You close your eyes and imagine a world where no one ever said the devil has a tail. The next morning, you leave before sunrise, passing by the chapel one last time. On the steps, curled in a warm patch of stone, is a black kitten, tiny, alone, asleep. You freeze. No one else is awake. The streets are still and cold. The kitten stirs, stretches one leg, then tucks its head back under its tail. You crouch and whisper, you're either very brave or very lost. Its ears twitch, and then it's gone slipping, silently through a gap in the wall like smoke with fur. You smile, because hope has whiskers. Morning dawns in washed-out gold as you continue your journey, feet dusty, cloak catching the soft chill of pre-dawn air. The horizon unfolds into low, endless fields where the mist clings to the grass like gossip to a noble court. You pass through villages that barely earn a name, where even the chickens seem anxious, and the wind carries more superstition than pollen, and everywhere still no cats. What there is, though, is fear. Not the loud, torch-waving kind, but a quieter dread. The kind that sits behind tired eyes and shrinks voices to whispers. In the next town you reach, the first thing you see is a crudely painted sign nailed to the gate. Beware of black shadows. Do not feed the unclean ones. You wonder how long it took them to come up with that slogan. It feels like someone tried to make a theological horror story fit on a welcome mat. You walk through the town slowly. It's small but not poor. The houses are made of clean stone. The church is modest but well kept, and the square has a dry fountain with a pigeon staring at you like it owns the place. You ask a cobbler where all the cats went. He lowers his voice. Gone, driven off, some taken to the woods. He won't say more, but he gestures subtly toward the forest just beyond the last row of cottages. You follow the trail. It's overgrown, more deer path than road. As you walk deeper into the trees, the air changes. The scent of smoke and meat and people fades. Now there's only moss, earth, and the brittle scent of last year's leaves. And then you hear it, not birdsong, not rustling leaves, purring, soft, rhythmic, and unmistakable. You step quietly into a small clearing, and what you find is both heartbreaking and somehow wonderful. A camp. Half a dozen makeshift tents, an old iron pot suspended over a burned-out fire, and perched everywhere on logs, in the crooks of trees, curled in wool blankets, cats, dozens of them, black, gray, orange, patched, young kittens tumbling over each other, old Toms grooming themselves with the careful dignity of monks. They don't run when they see you. Some glance lazily in your direction. One blinks twice, and then, from one of the tents, a woman steps out. She's middle-aged, sharp-eyed, with a streak of gray in her braid and an armful of chopped wood. She doesn't look surprised to see you. If anything, she looks mildly annoyed. "One," she mutters. "Fine, just don't touch the food." Or Dandelion, he bites. You glance at Dandelion, a massive ginger cat who looks like he bench presses mice for fun. He glares back like he's daring you to pet him. The woman introduces herself as Marta. She used to be a healer in a town not far from here. When the cat panic began, she sheltered the strays. At first, people just looked the other way. Then they started whispering. Then came the accusations. They said I was a witch, she says, stirring a pot of barley soup. Said the cats brought plagues and dreams and unnatural weather. I said they brought pest control and company. They didn't like that answer, so she fled, and she wasn't alone. A few others came to her cousin, a scholar from the city, a widow who swears cats kept her sane after her husband died. Now they live here, in the woods, raising vegetables, sharing stories, and sheltering what the rest of the world called cursed. You sit with them for a while. The cats nap in a circle around you, warm and soft, like breathing pillows. Someone hands you a carved bowl of thick soup that tastes better than anything you've had in days. They tell you stories quietly, with a strange mix of pride and sadness. Tales of one's beloved pets turned pariahs, of towns that lost every cat only to be overrun with vermin, of noblemen who ordered cat burnings and then fled their own homes when disease came knocking. One man, a former monk, tells you about a manuscript he saved from a monastery library, a bestiary that praises the cat for its vigilance, grace, and cleanliness. We used to respect them, he says, before we decided that what we feared must be evil. Historians still examine this shift, the cultural pivot from reverence to revulsion. In ancient Egypt, cats were sacred. In Rome, they were guardians of the hearth. And then, somehow, they became omens, scapegoats, demons in disguise. All because someone wrote it down with enough conviction to make it stick. Before you leave, Marta gives you a small pouch of dried herbs for travel luck and one stern warning. If you speak of this place, speak with kindness or not at all. You promise. As you walk back toward the village, one of the cats, small, sleek, jet black, follows you a while. It pads silently beside you, tail flicking gently, before darting into a hedge and vanishing like a wisp of smoke. Back in town, the sun is setting. You pass the cobbler again. He looks at you, then at your shoes, and raises an eyebrow. Been in the woods, have you? You shrugged. Saw a squirrel. He nods slowly. Right. That night, you lie awake in the loft, of a quiet in listening to the scratching of rats in the walls. You think about the clearing, about Marta and Dandelion, and the stories you heard. And for the first time in days, you feel a strange, cautious sense of hope. Because maybe not everyone believes the lies. Maybe not everyone wants to burn what they don't understand. Maybe some people still remember what a cat really is. A protector, a presence, a purring rebuke to superstition. And somewhere out there, beyond the towns and beyond the fear, they're waiting, whiskers twitching, eyes wide open. You leave the village behind under a sky the color of wet parchment. It's a soft, overcast morning, the kind where sound feels muffled and even the wind seems reluctant to stir. The road bends east, past small vineyards, ruined watchtowers, and fields where scarecrows look suspiciously like failed exorcists. Your thoughts linger on the camp in the woods, the cats, the quiet firelight, the smell of barley and ash, the way the black kitten had walked beside you, as if to say, don't forget what you saw. But in the next town, forgetting is precisely what everyone is trying to do. This settlement is larger, fortified, busy, and paranoid in a more expensive way. You notice it in the double locks on every cellar door, the iron spikes on the gates, and the presence of guards that seem more interested in squinting suspiciously at villagers than actually guarding anything. And then there are the sermons. The church here isn't content with whispers. It has invested in volume. At midday, a booming voice echoes through the square, courtesy of a priest with lungs, like bellows and a flair for theatrical hand gestures. You catch part of the message as you pass through the square. For the Lord said, cast out the beasts of shadow and cleanse the house of impurity. Let not the four-pawed deceiver find shelter among the faithful. He doesn't say the word cat. You see it in the glances exchanged. The woman who covers her child's ears. The man who tightens his grip on a string of wooden rosary beads. The old baker who closes her shop shutters with shaking hands, even though it's still midday. A boy is dragged to the front of the church steps by two older men. He's maybe 12, with hay in his hair and panic in his eyes. They accuse him of harboring a black kitten, say he's been feeding it near the edge of the stables. He denies it at first, but then, because terror and shame go together like stale bread and old cheese, he breaks down and admits it. He named it Milo, said it was hungry, said it followed him home. They call the priest. What happens next is not violent, but it's cruel. The boy is paraded through the town, forced to recite verses while holding a sign that says, I sheltered the deceiver. No one touches him, no one stops him, but the silence around him is louder than any condemnation. You watch from a shadowed alley, fists clenched. Historians still debate how widespread public humiliations like this were, or whether they were isolated acts of overzealous enforcement. But they agree on the effect, fear, not just of cats but of being associated with them. Fear that silenced empathy, that caged reason. Later that evening, you visit the stable where the boy said Milo had been. You bring a sliver of salted fish wrapped in cloth. You sit quietly, wait, and eventually, from the shadows, comes a small, cautious shape, thin, undernourished, but with bright, wary eyes and the slow, practiced steps of something that's had to learn to survive. Milo. He sniffs the fish, then devours it in under a minute. Then he sits, not on your lap, not against your side, just close enough to be seen, just close enough to be remembered. You don't try to pet him. You just sit together as night unfolds. Back at the inn, you ask the barkeep about the boy. He shrugs. Lucky they didn't accuse him of being a witch, he says. Then adds, as if explaining gravity, witches keep cats. Everyone knows that. You push further. Ask why. He thinks for a moment. Because they're quiet, too quiet, and they watch. Always watching. He leans in. It's unnatural. You nod, slowly. Then ask, so do owls. Should we burn those too? He blinks, then walks away without answering. That night, you dream of a city filled with statues, all of them cats, black ones, sitting on rooftops, curled around fountains, watching, always watching, but saying nothing. In the dream, the people walk beneath them, heads bowed. They move quickly, whispering prayers. And the catstone and silent never blink. You wake before dawn and decide it's time to leave. The next town is 2 days' walk, and the sky is threatening rain. Along the way, you pass a burned barn. The soot is still fresh. You hear that it belonged to a widow accused of feeding spirits. No one found a cat butt that didn't stop the fire. You see a poster nailed to a tree. Cleansing ceremony all townsfolk required. Bring no pets. Someone has drawn whiskers on the bishop's face. You allow yourself a small, bitter laugh. Then you hear it far in the distance. A scream. Short, sharp, human. You don't go toward it. You already know what it's about. You press on, boots heavy with mud and silence. The road narrows. The trees grow thicker. The path seems more forgotten. And then movement on a rock just ahead. A cat, black, long-limbed, sitting like a king. It doesn't move when you approach. Just watches. Calm, alert. Like it's seen 100 travelers before you. Like it knows where you've been. You stop. The cat blinks. Then it hops down and melts into the forest. Tail flicking once, like a final punctuation mark. You stand there for a long time, because what lingers isn't just sorrow or outrage or confusion. What lingers is reverence for the ones who refused to bow, for the ones who were blamed for being silent, for the ones who never asked to be symbols and yet became legends. You arrive at the next town after dusk, your cloak damp, boots heavy with trail and time. The sky has already bruised into indigo, and the horizon burns faintly orange, where the last light clings stubbornly to the hills. It's the kind of night that makes even the stars look tired. The gates are open, but only just. 2 guards, too young to shave properly, check your belongings like you might be smuggling heresy in your satchel. You offer them a half loaf of bread and a story about seeing a 2-headed goat on the road. They let you pass. No one questions stories when they're tired. Inside the town, it's unusually quiet. Doors are shut. Windows are shuttered. No music, no chatter, no smell of roasted meat wafting from hearths. The silence has weight. It drapes over the streets like fog. Only the occasional torch flicker reminds you that people still live here. As you search for an inn, you stumble upon a strange sight. A row of cages stacked in the square, empty, rusting, and far too small for livestock. A young boy sitting nearby tells you they were used to catch familiars. He says it like he's repeating something memorized, something he doesn't understand but fears anyway. You ask him what a familiar is. He frowns. A helper of witches, he says slowly. Usually a black cat, sometimes a toad, but cats are worse. They talk. My uncle said so. You sit with him for a moment. He offers you a pebble. It's shaped like a heart. You thank him. At the inn, you're given a room with a crooked window and a key that looks older than original sign. The woman who runs the place brings you a bowl of stew that tastes mostly of sadness and onions. She doesn't speak much. Her eyes dart often toward the hearth. Later, by the fire, you overhear two merchants whispering about a nearby town that burned all its cats in a ceremony meant to purge the pestilence. The next week, they say, the town's granaries collapsed from rot. The week after that fever spread. No one connects the dots. Or rather, they refuse to. You ask if you can visit the town. One of the merchants laughs bitterly. You can visit, he says, but don't expect to find answers, just ashes. The next morning, you go anyway. It's a day's walk through rolling countryside, past fields that were once green, but now look withered and brittle. The town sits in a shallow valley, surrounded by smoke-stained stones and a wall more symbolic than functional. You're greeted by silence. Doors hang crookedly on their hinges. Chickens peck aimlessly at the earth. You see no people until, finally, at the edge of a courtyard, you find her, an old woman, seated on a stool, weaving a basket from what appears to be wheat stalks and strips of dyed cloth. She looks up as you approach, but doesn't stop working. You ask her what happened here. She doesn't answer right away, just keeps weaving. Then, softly, they came with fire and prayers. Said the cats were the reason. Said the mewling brought misfortune. So they took them, all of them. Even the ones that never left the barn. Her hands don't tremble, but her voice does. After that, the mice came, then the rats, then the sickness, then the silence. You sit on the step beside her, unsure of what to say. She doesn't ask for sympathy. She just wants someone to listen. She tells you about her cat, Dora, black as coal, quiet as mist. Always came home before sunset, slept beside her during storms, watched over the chickens like she was on salary. They took Dora, she says, and burned her in the square. You wait. She didn't even struggle. A long silence passes. Then she speaks again. But I think she knew they were wrong. I think she forgave us before the fire ever touched her. The wind shifts. It smells of wet stone and something faintly metallic. You look around the courtyard, the cracked well, the boarded windows, the cold remains of a fire. Pit once used for something far worse than warmth. This is what fear builds. Not safety, not purity, just ruin. Historians have long puzzled over how communities could enact such violence against creatures that had once been cherished. But maybe the answer lies not in policy or PayPal decree, but in the human tendency to externalize fear, to place it on the back of something smaller, something defenseless, something that doesn't speak your language but still knows you're wrong. You leave the town before sunset. You don't say goodbye to the woman. You just leave a small carving on her doorstep, one of the merchant's pebbles, now shaped carefully into a curled sleeping cat. The walk back is long. The clouds roll in again. Rain falls, not heavy, but steady, like the sky is weeping politely. That night, back in the town from before, you light a candle in your room. Not for prayer, just for company. And just before you sleep, there's a sound at your window. a paw. Light, gentle. You open the shutters, slowly. A black cat sits on the ledge. You stare, it blinks. You blink. Then, without a sound, it hops down into the darkness and vanishes. And for the first time in days, you sleep without dreams. You rise with the dawn, reluctant, as if the morning itself is a continuation of a story you'd rather not end. The town, once cloaked in suspicion and silence, now hums faintly with motion vendors dragging carts into position, dogs barking half-heartedly at wind, and a rooster crowing like he's just remembered it's his job. But there's something else to an echo of that paw at your window. You head toward the town square, the candle stub from last night still warm in your pocket. The innkeeper watches you go without speaking. Maybe she knows. Maybe they all do. The streets are muddy from last night's rain, puddles reflecting crooked chimneys and sagging eaves. You pass the same cage stacks from before, but now they're broken, scattered like remnants of a spell that failed. One has a paw print in the rust, tiny, precise. Your feet lead you beyond the square, beyond the houses, toward the road east. There's a market rumored. They're a sprawling one, part trading hub, part traveling show, part philosophical debate. If you linger long enough near the bread stall, you decide to go. Not because you need supplies, but because you need to know what comes next. You travel alone now, mostly. The townsfolk have grown wary of strangers who ask about cats, or maybe they're just tired of remembering. The road is wide, muddy, and lined with stones that seem older than memory. You spot foxglove growing in patches and thorn bushes arranged like nature's sarcasm. Occasionally, you see a farmhouse in the distance, each with its own smoke curl, its own secrets. You pass one where an elderly woman is tossing seed to a flock of chickens and one dark shape crouched behind a barrel, watching birds with casual interest. You pause. The shape moves, sleek and fluid, disappearing behind the shed. Still there, still watching, you arrive at the market by midday. It's a maze of tents, stalls, and wagons, all painted in colors that would hurt your eyes if not dulled by age and dust. The air is thick with smells fresh bread, spiced wine, wet wool, and desperation dressed as excitement. Everyone's trading something: coins, stories, silk, suspicion. At one booth, a man sells wooden toys. At another, a woman displays bones strung into necklaces. She says they're fox bones, but you suspect otherwise. You keep walking. Then you see it. A tent, plain and low, with a hand-lettered sign that reads, "Wonders once worshipped, tales of the familiar." Inside is dim. Lanterns burn low, flickering like breath, and lining the walls, paintings, etchings, little sculptures, all of cats, not demonic, not monstrous, majestic. One shows a cat sitting in profile, eyes closed, tail curled, like a question mark, a crescent moon above its head. Another shows a line of cats walking across a roof in silhouette, like a silent parade of twilight monks. You turn, and an old man steps from behind a curtain. His beard is white, his robe patched in too many places to count. He nods at you, not warmly, but knowingly. "You've seen them," he says. Not a question. You nod. He doesn't ask where or how. He simply beckons you deeper. You follow. The next room is filled with scrolls, some in Latin, some in Greek, one in a language you can't place. Each one contains myths, records, forgotten devotions. Before the fear, he says, brushing dust from a volume. They were guardians, spirits of the hearth, keepers of sleep and silence. Do you know the Romans believed they could see what we couldn't? You do now. He shows you a tapestry, frayed at the edges, faded but unmistakably old. It depicts a woman sitting on a throne made of moonlight, a black cat curled at her feet. The background is filled with stars, not arranged like constellations, but like eyes, watching, witnessing. He tells you how, in some parts of the world, cats were buried with honors, mummified, prayed over, that in Persia they were believed to walk between worlds, that in parts of ancient China their cries were considered omens, not of doom, but of transition. You ask him why it changed. He looks down, because they didn't obey, he says. And we don't forgive what we can't control. You leave the tent quietly, heart heavier, but somehow clearer. The rest of the market is a blur, noise, color, coins clinking. You drift through it like smoke. Eventually, you sit beneath a willow tree on the outskirts, unpacking bread from your bag and breaking it slowly. And there, like a habit, like a whisper, hear the padding of feet. A black cat, just one dot, it approaches. Carefully, not begging, not fleeing. It sits beside you, tail curled, ears twitching. You offer a piece of crust. It sniffs it, declines. Of course, it leans against your leg knot to ask for anything, but to exist beside you. And as you sit there, you remember the places you've seen. The apothecary's shop, the woods full of whispering tents, the town where ashes speak louder than prayers. You remember Helga and Kay's, the candlelit chapel, the boy with the kitten named Milo. You remember Marta, with her firelight and her warning, speak with kindness, or not at all. You watch the cat, and it watches the wind. Then, without ceremony, it stands and walks away slowly, deliberately disappearing behind the roots of the willow tree. You don't follow. Some things are not meant to be pursued, only remembered. The road from the market fades behind you like breath on glass. You travel quietly now, less like a wanderer, more like a witness. The world seems changed, though nothing has changed visibly. The trees still arch overhead like patient archivists. The rivers still carve their way through ancient stone. And the wind still carries more rumor than truth. But you're different, because now everywhere you go, you see the spaces cats once filled. You stop in a village where the bread is flat and the smiles flatter. Children play with hoops and sticks, but none are followed by the quiet shadows of curious whiskers. You ask the Bakeran older woman, with flour on her sleeves and creases deepened by grief, she's seen any cats lately. She flinches. No, she says, not since the Black Week. You ask what happened. The priest said the sickness came from witches, said they sent spirits in animal form. People got scared, burned the cats, all of them, even mine. She pauses, hands trembling just a little. She wipes them on her apron, as if trying to erase the memory. I had one, she says. His name was Alto. He slept on the windowsill. He liked music, would always curl near the lute. She turns away. You leave quietly, and as you pass the bakery later, you see a small carving above the door. A cat, just a simple outline. It's been scrubbed and painted over. But the shape remains, like memory, etched into wood. Further along, you stop at a crossroads shrine, the kind where saints stand with chipped noses and weather-stained robes. Someone's left offerings, a crust of bread, a sprig of rosemary, and unmistakably, cat's collar, woven leather, tiny bell still attached. You light a candle beside it, not for prayer, for remembrance. In the next town, things are different. The people don't hide their cats. They display them painted on doorways, carved in beams, stitched into tapestries. At the local inn, you're served beer in a mug that has a tabby cat on it, chasing a mouse around the rim. You ask about it. The innkeeper, a man with kind eyes and a slightly twisted ankle, smiles. We didn't follow the purge, he says. We had plague like everyone else, but we had fewer rats and our cats. Well, they stayed. You raise your mug to the ones who stayed. He nods to the ones who were wiser than us. Historians still argue why some towns resisted the hysteria. Some say it was luck, others isolation. Others still claim certain leaders simply didn't buy the church's story. But whatever the reason, you now know, resistance was not only possible, it happened quietly, boldly, one paw print at a time. That night, a gray cat curls at the foot of your bed without asking. You don't move. You wake to find it gone, but a single silver hair remains on your blanket. You keep walking in a coastal village. You find fishermen carving cats into the hulls of their boats. They say it brings luck, chases storms, keeps the fish biting. One tells you a story about a cat that warned a family of an incoming wave just by leaping to the roof seconds before it hit. The tale is likely embellished, but you believe the spirit of it, and eventually your road bends again, back to where you began. Rome, now aged by time, not distance. It smells the same dust stone. Something simmering behind closed shutters, but it feels different. The statues still stand. The basilicas still rise, but something beneath it all hums quieter, like an echo reduced to a whisper. You walk the old alleys past the bakery, where you first noticed their absence, past the market where you heard the rumors, past the square where the sermons rang out against shadow and fur, and there, on the warm stones outside a chapel wall, you see it, a cat, black as ink, thin, yes but poised, watching, not hidden, not hunted, just there. You sit across from it. It doesn't blink. You don't speak. And in that moment, everything, every story, every whisper, every fire, every foolish law, and every small act of kindness feels like a thread winding together into this quiet, breathing presence. You remember what the old man in the market said. They didn't obey. And we don't forgive what we can't control. But maybe, just maybe, we learn. Maybe slowly, maybe painfully, but eventually the cat stands, stretches, then walks away, not because it's afraid, but because it has better things to do, and you sit for a while longer. Let the sun settle on your shoulders. Let the past settle into place, because history isn't always grand. Battles and crowns and dates carved in marble. Sometimes it's small, soft, whiskered, and it waits for us too. Understand, now the journey is ending. Let the candle burn lower. Let your breath slow. The road has twisted through time and fear, through fields of silence and rooms full of whispering. You've walked where panic replaced logic, where paw prints were erased by torches and inked again in memory. But through it all, something gentle endured. You've seen them, haven't you? The cats not as monsters, not as myths, but as companions, as watchers, as quiet rebukes to our loud mistakes. They didn't fight our fires with claws. They waited them out. They didn't cry for justice. They just disappeared. And yet, here they are, still on rooftops, in courtyards, across parchment, and paintings and dreams, even now, in the hush between thoughts. Maybe you can hear it, the soft pad of their steps on old stones, the low rumble of a purr in the corner of the room, the memory of something small and brave that never asked to be feared. So breathe deeply, let your shoulders sink, let the story settle. Like dust on a warm sill, you are safe now, not in a world without fear, but in a world where we learn from it, and somewhere on a window ledge, or a garden wall, or just outside your door, a cat curls into itself and dreams, not of fires or sermons or cages, but of sunbeams and sleep, and stories like this one.